Welcome back, everyone. Please welcome our next presenter. We have Skye Bioscience Inc. It trades on the OTCQB under the symbol SKYE and is a biopharmaceutical company unlocking the pharmaceutical potential of cannabinoids through the development of its proprietary cannabinoid-derived molecules to treat diseases with significant unmet needs. Please welcome the VP of Corporate Development, Karam. Takhar. Welcome.
Thanks for that introduction. As alluded to, I'm the corporate or VP of Corporate Development and Investor Relations, and excited to talk to you a little bit about what Skye's doing to unlock the pharmaceutical potential of cannabinoids. So, standard legal disclaimer here, I will be making forward-looking statements during the course of this presentation. We ask anybody that's interested to look to our most recent filings that can be found on our website or with the SEC. So as mentioned, we're a biopharmaceutical company and we're working to develop differentiated synthetic proprietary cannabinoid derivatives to treat diseases with significant unmet need. Our first indication that we're going to be going after is glaucoma, but we've got other indications in our pipeline as well as other molecules. What's important to note about what differentiates us relative to some of the other cannabinoid-based companies that you might have heard of is that we're working with cannabinoid derivatives. And why that's important is that it allows us to acquire intellectual property. And what that ultimately leads to is value in biotech. So when we talk about that, what we're referring to is that what the molecules that we use are not found in a natural plant. We've taken them as a backbone and further developed them to enhance their known therapeutic benefits. So we've got a very experienced team. We all come from the biotech and life sciences field, and we're just looking to apply the well-tried and trusted techniques of biotechnology to the cannabinoid space. It's a really interesting time for the company. We've got some important milestones within the next 6 months. Most importantly, we will be dosing our first patient before the end of the year. Just taking a step back, I think it's important to note that for companies like us, this is really a pivotal time. And why I say that is that we really had a validating event earlier in this year, and that was with the acquisition of GW Pharma. So GW Pharma has long been a pioneer in the space that's taken the time and the resources to push cannabinoids through the rigors of clinical trials and provide the resources to complete those trials, ultimately leading to the approval of the first plant-derived cannabinoid, Epidiolex. And in doing so, what they achieved is, the very small population of patients, only around 100,000 patients. However, that one drug for this small indication is already generating over $500 million in annual revenue. And that all packaged together with their pipeline led to their acquisition for $7.2 billion. So we are very confident that we are going to be able to follow a very similar path of developing cannabinoids. We think we can go a step further by using synthetic cannabinoids, which allows us to have more control over intellectual property, and really think that this pharmaceutical approach to cannabinoids is where the long-term value for investors and the long-term benefit for patients exists. So the first indication that Skye is going to go after is glaucoma. Glaucoma is the leading cause of irreversible blindness. It is a disease that causes progressive damage to the cells that make up the optic nerve. These cells are referred to as retinal ganglion cells, or RGCs. And over time, these cells incur injury, and as they're injured, they start to die off. And they die off from the periphery, as you see here. On the left, you've got an image of what normal, healthy vision would look like. And as you progress with the disease and these cells with optic nerve die off, you start to get this tunneling vision. And eventually, without treatment, you will lose your sight. And any damage that's done to these RGC cells or optic nerve, it's irreversible. So it's a very large market. Currently, there's 78 million patients estimated to have glaucoma. This is expected to grow significantly to well over 100 million by 2040. This is largely due to a growing aging population. And these numbers are probably a little bit underrepresented because a lot of patients don't necessarily learn that they have glaucoma until they actually see damage to their vision or notice changes to their vision. So up to 40% of patients currently may not even recognize that they have glaucoma because there are no overt symptoms unless you're going for regular eye exams and someone's checking for things like intraocular pressure. So just a little bit on how glaucoma works or what the physiology of it is. So in a normal healthy eye, there's a constant production and drainage of fluid. And this is to maintain the normal health of the eye, helps maintain the shape of the eye, move debris and nutrients in and out of the eye. What happens over time is that the drainage canals begin to get clogged, and it prevents the fluid from draining normally through these canals. And what happens is the fluid starts to back up. And as that fluid starts to back up, it increases internal pressure within the eye. And this is what we call intraocular pressure. And with this elevated intraocular pressure, it exerts force at the back of the eye, and it induces a crush-like injury to the cells that make up the back of the eye, the retina, which ultimately are the cells that make up the optic nerve. And so as that crush-like injury inflicts damage on these cells, they start to die off, and that's when you start to see the vision loss. So currently there's no cure for glaucoma. There's a significant number of drugs that are on the market. These are all legacy drugs, and they all aim to lower intraocular pressure, which is a risk factor and not really the root of the disease. These drugs have been on the market for over 20 years. Most of them are generics. Why you see so many drugs is the fact that patients don't necessarily respond very well to any one of these single agents. It's what we call a non-responder market, where patients have a poor response or will develop a tolerance over time. And ultimately, over more than 50% of glaucoma patients will end up on 2 or more of these drugs during the course of their lifetime, which is not ideal, because what happens is once you start piling on different drugs, you pile on some of their adverse effects as well too. And you can see that none of these agents are currently without any sort of side effects as well. Additionally, when you're asking people to take 2 or more drugs, it also reduces compliance, which is going to have negative effects on the long-term course of this disease. So really, this space has lacked innovation and is ripe for a new class of therapy. Sorry. So this is where we come in, and this is where we tie in our cannabinoid approach to glaucoma. So I think many people have heard anecdotes about people smoking cannabis and it's to treat their glaucoma. Initially, much of the medical cannabis prescriptions that were written by doctors were for glaucoma. What people are probably less familiar with is the actual science, and there is a significant amount of science to support the effect of cannabinoids for the treatment of glaucoma. To start off with, cannabinoid receptors are found throughout the body and do various roles within managing vital functions. However, the eye is one of the organs that is most rich with cannabinoid receptors. And so this is what kind of led to some of the initial research to kind of see what effects cannabinoids could have within the eye. And there's actually been, along with preclinical data, there's actually a significant amount of clinical data as well too that helps support the notion that cannabinoids can be therapeutically beneficial for glaucoma. The first study was actually in humans, was commissioned by the U.S. government back in the 70s. The government was actually worried about the troops smoking too much cannabis or marijuana and how that might affect the visual acuity. It turned out that they could still see straight and shoot straight, but you had this other side effect. You had this lowering of IOP. And at that point, many other groups also followed on and did experiments to look at the effects of THC or cannabinoids in glaucoma. And here, this is just a summary of a sample of human trials that have looked at various ways to deliver cannabis systemically to reduce IOP. And in each of these studies, they see the same result. THC lowers IOP. So then the question is that, okay, we know that THC lowers IOP and it can have a benefit to glaucoma. Why is there no approved drug currently? And the reason behind that is that all those studies that I just showed you previously use a systemic delivery. So they're either consuming the cannabis or the THC by inhalation, smoking it, or ingestion by some sort of oral mechanism. And there's significant drawbacks to that. So one is that with both those methods, there's a lot of interpatient variability. So you get all sorts of different pharmacokinetics and dynamics. There's no real standardization to get an effective dose into the eye. Also, when you're consuming it systemically, you have to take a relatively high amount of it to get a therapeutic dose within the eye. Additionally, when consumed orally, you have very poor bioavailability, less than 10%. Smoking it, you have better bioavailability, but the half-life is quite short. The drug is only effective for about 90 minutes, which means that you'd be needing to consume cannabis every 2 hours, which comes with other side effects. Most importantly, or most pronounced, is going to be the psychoactive effects. So if you're having to take a lot of this and you're having to take it quite frequently, you're going to have negative effects related to the high. Additionally, there can be some other drawbacks that are not conducive to preserving the optic nerve cell's health, and that's to do with decreases of blood pressure. So the next question was, well, if systemic deliveries is not a good route of administration, why don't we look at a local administration? So people look to see if they could create an eye drop of purified THC. The issue with that is that when you extract THC from the plant, or even if you have a synthetic version of THC, that molecule on itself is what we call lipophilic. So it's fat-loving or oil-soluble. It doesn't like to mix with water. The surface of the eye is watery. So what would happen is that some pharmaceutical companies and researchers went to make these drops. They would try to drop into the eye, but none of the drug would actually get into the eye. It wouldn't be able to transverse the cornea. So essentially, they just blinked it away. And this is really where Skye comes into play and where our approach is working to solve this challenge. And so in collaboration with the University of Mississippi, and it's important to note that the University of Mississippi has been the only federally licensed agency for over 50 years that's had the ability to cultivate and research cannabinoids. So there's a tremendous wealth of knowledge there that we're tapping into, and working with them. What we've been able to develop is a prodrug, and a prodrug is on its own an inactive molecule. However, once that molecule enters the body, it's metabolized into an active form. And so what we did with THC is we added this structure called valine hemisuccinate. And by adding this valine hemisuccinate, or VHS, what we did is we changed the physiochemical properties of the THC molecule. And what I mean by that is we increased its solubility and we increased its ability to penetrate into the tissues of the eye where the cannabinoid receptors reside and where the THC has the ability to work its magic. So what happens is with our THC prodrug, THC VHS, we're now able to get the molecule into the eye, which was a previous challenge, And once it's in the eye, the molecule is metabolized back into the native THC molecule. And so now we're able to deliver THC directly into the eye, where it can provide us therapeutic benefit, and we avoid any of the systemic issues. So you get all the drug in the eye, none of it into the bloodstream or the brain, and you don't see any of the negative side effects. So now that we were able to show that we can deliver THC effectively to the eye with our new molecule, we wanted to see how our molecule performs commercially. And what we did is we went head to head with the leading two therapeutics in the space. And if you remember from the previous slide, the glaucoma market is almost a $7 billion market. And these two classes of drugs here, latanoprost and timolol, represent more than 80% of that current market. And what we were able to demonstrate in this study is that not only did our molecule reduce intraocular pressure to a greater extent, it was also able to do so over a greater duration. So these are both very important results. And we've been able to do some additional follow-up studies. Recently, we just announced some data where we did a combination study that looked at our molecule again versus the standard of care. And we were able to demonstrate that our molecule in the second study, once again, as a single agent, was able to reduce intraocular pressure better than the standard of care. And in addition, we were able to combine it with a newer product, which on its own is not necessarily great at lowering IOP, but has shown the ability to add further benefit when combined with existing drugs. And we also saw that same effect. So when we combined our THC VHS with Rhopressa, we were able to see a further decrease in intraocular pressure. So for some of those patients that may need additional IOP lowering, this could potentially provide that benefit. This data is going to be coming out in a publication, and we plan to kind of follow it up with further studies as well. So a little bit, we know in vivo it works. We know in humans THC works. It just hasn't been a good way to deliver it. We've solved that portion of the problem. This is just looking at a little bit about how the mechanisms might be at play. And what we did here is we worked with a group called Glaucoma, and what they have is a 3D model that uses human tissues of the trabecular meshwork, and that's the drainage canals. And what we were able to show is that using THC in both healthy and diseased tissues, THC was able to increase the outflow of fluid in this model. Additionally, what we looked at was we looked at biomarkers of that same tissue. And what we saw was there was a significant decrease in biomarkers related to inflammation and fibrosis. And so you can imagine if you've got these drainage canals and over time they get clogged with inflammation and fibrosis, our THC is reducing that, which basically is opening up these canals and allowing for increased drainage through these networks. So I spent the first bit of this primarily on glaucoma related to intraocular pressure. It's important to note that there's a large proportion of patients that have glaucoma, so they still see this progressive vision loss, but they don't present with elevated IOP. And it's unclear in these patients exactly what is leading to this neurodegeneration. However, IOP lowering drugs or controlling their IOP does not seem to delay the progression of the disease. Interestingly, most of these patients are found, or the prevalence of what we call normal IOP glaucoma is in Asian countries, and in countries like India and China, up to 90% of the patients that have glaucoma actually present with normal IOP. And you can kind of see how that's represented here in the sales of IOP lowering drugs, where you look down here where China and India basically have minimal sales. And it's not because they don't have glaucoma patients, it's just that the drugs that are currently on the market do not provide any benefit for them. And so what this is demonstrating that, as effective as the IOP drugs are, there's opportunity to, expand that. Really where we need to be is in neuroprotection. And what's interesting about that is that cannabinoids have previously been demonstrated to show neuroprotective properties. And so here again is just a summary of previous work that's been done in the space of glaucoma. These are different animal models in different species. And once again, they all demonstrate that the use of cannabinoids has a neuroprotective effect on the optic nerve cells. And so we've currently got a study that is kicking off here, and we're going to be looking at a rat model that's called the optic nerve crush model. And we're going to be looking at our molecule's ability in rats to provide neuroprotection. So this is something that's kind of, what we'll plan to explore as our secondary, approach. In our first trial design, we're going to be looking at IOP. We think we've got a very successful preclinical package that's going to support our human trials. And, as we learn more about the neuroprotective properties of our molecule, we'll look at how to incorporate that in further human trials. So our first human trial is scheduled to kick off before the end of the year. It will be a typical, safety and tolerability study. However, we will be assessing IOP as well in this study. And so the current study design is set up to have five single ascending cohorts and 3 multiple ascending dose cohorts. And in that last portion of the study, we're looking to at the effects of our drug, not only in healthy patients, but we're also going to include a couple of cohorts that will have patients with elevated IOP, either glaucoma or there's another indication which is called ocular hypertension. And what that will hopefully allow us to do, give us some early insights into the potential ability of our molecule to affect IOP, which is not necessarily an outcome that is viewed in normal safety and tolerability studies. So as we talked about early, we've got a lot of milestones coming up over the next 12 months. We spent, as I mentioned, we do have other molecules. So our second molecule is a CBD derivative. We're currently doing pharmacology and some in vivo work on that molecule, and we hope to share some more of that and some commentary on indication in the second half of this year. We've completed our preclinical study with combination with Repressa. Our CMC GLP protocols are complete. We're just wrapping up our genotoxicity studies. And as I mentioned, our neuroprotection study is just about to kick off here, and we hope to have data in the coming months on that. Ultimately, the key driver for the company is going to be the human trials, and that data is expected in the first half of 2022. So just on our cap table here, we currently have around 370 million shares outstanding, and we're trading at a market cap around $70 million. All the development milestones that I had mentioned on the previous slide, we are funded and capitalized to do so, and we're capitalized to complete our phase 1 and get to our top line data for that in the first half of next year. We've got a very experienced management team, as I mentioned, and this team has all had an opportunity to work with one another in previous ventures as well too. And they've got a very impressive track record of rapidly moving preclinical programs into the clinic and partnering with big pharma. So our CEO, Puneet Dhillon, he was previously co-founded a company called OncoSec Medical, and within 2 years working with his team, he was able to through that company, take a preclinical product and get it into the clinical trials within less than 2 years. So this is something that the team is very familiar with, and we're going to take that experience from pharma and apply it to these new cannabinoid molecules. Additionally, it's important to note that we've been able to attract some very, very experienced and reputable advisors. So we're very honored and humbled to have this team behind us and support us and be a sounding board. On the clinical side, we pretty much have the who's who of glaucoma researchers. Robert Rich has been in the space for more than 40 years. It's often referred to as the godfather of glaucoma. Jeffrey Goldberg is a leading expert in neuroprotection in the glaucoma space, and Dr. Pasquale has been practicing for over 40 years in New York, and much of his research is on normotensive glaucoma and looking at new and innovative therapies to not only treat but also diagnose glaucoma. On the scientific side, we've got Giovanni and Eduardo. These two individuals have been studying cannabinoids with a combined amount of research going back 70 years. So cannabinoids have kind of been in the limelight in the last 5 years or so, but we've got researchers who have been doing this their whole careers. And so we're very lucky to have them, and they're helping drive a lot of our R&D initiatives with our other programs as well too. So just to kind of wrap things up, the key takeaways is we know that THC has therapeutic benefit in glaucoma. The issue for why we don't have any approved THC-based therapy is that when you take it systemically, you have adverse events that outweigh the benefit. Now, what we've been able to do is solve that. We've been able to make a molecule that allows us to deliver an effective dose of THC directly into the eye, where we'll be able to see the same therapeutic benefit that's been previously demonstrated without any of the negative side effects. Additionally, we know that cannabinoids have the potential to be neuroprotective, and we're going to further explore that. And that would be a game changer for the space, because ultimately what we're trying to do is preserve the optic nerve. Intraocular pressure is one of the ways to help preserve that. So we're really excited to kind of further develop that. We've got some really important milestones before the end of the year. We'll be dosing our first patient, which is going to be a major catalyst for this company. Our first clinical trial is very low cost and quick. We plan to initiate before the end of the year and have data in the first half of 2022. And then interestingly, it's important to note that because of this indication and the fact that it's a local delivery and you don't really necessarily have a lot of off-target effects or systemic effects, deals are often done early, like in a phase 2 for this. And our team's been experienced with partnering with big pharma for commercialization in the past as well too. So with that, I will wrap it up, and I think that leaves maybe a time for a question or two.
Well, it is time to move on to the next presenter, but you have lots of questions. And so we're going to send them right to you so you can answer them on your own. You're just going to have to join us again at another conference because you have a great presentation, great technologies here.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and we'd be delighted to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to your updates. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, as we transition to the next presenter, remember there's going to be a black screen for a moment, but stay with us because we're coming right back.